Hi again and welcome back. In this video, we'll be looking at perfect infinitives and imperatives. Perfect infinitives really fit the pattern of other infinitives fairly well. If we think about the active infinitive, first of all, we remember that the present active infinitive was luain, the present stem plus ain, epsilon, iota, nu. The second aorist used the same ending, just with the second aorist stem. But the first aorist infinitive gives us the regular stem plus the sigma tense marker, and then instead of the iota nu ending, we had I, the alpha connecting vowel typical of the first aorist, followed by an iota. Now, if we remember lucai, then the perfect active infinitive is fairly easy to remember too, because we again take the perfect stem, and we're going to have that I ending, just like in the first aorist active infinitive. But instead of just the sigma as the tense marker, here we're going to have ken as the tense marker. The thing to remember here is that we don't just have a kappa, like we do with regular first perfect verbs. It's not lelu kai to match lu sai. The tense marker is expanded here to become ken, so it's lelu ken I. Things are simpler when it comes to the middle passive perfect infinitive. Like with the present, the middle and passive in the perfect have the same form. So we don't have to worry about a separate middle and passive form like we did with the aorist. So if you remember that the present middle and passive infinitive ended with esthai, and the second aorist middle passive infinitive ended with the same esthai, the first aorist ended with the same sthai ending, but just used the sigma alpha, the sigma tense marker, and alpha connecting vowel in front of it to give us sasthai. In the perfect, then, we have what we would really expect, the perfect stem, lelu, with the sthai ending and no connecting vowel. Remember, that's typical of the perfect middle and passive. So it's just lelusthai. But that sthai ending is the same for middles all the way through, and you can remember to use the perfect stem and that there's no connecting vowel for these perfect middle and passives. How do we translate perfect infinitives? Well, these are regular infinitives. They do everything that other infinitives do. The only difference is that they have the nuance of perfect aspect. And if you remember, that means reviewing the action as something that's completed with ongoing effects, ongoing impact. As a first basic translation, we can translate these to have something. In other words, to have with the past participle of the verb in English. So lelu kenai, we could translate to have released. Beble kenai from balo, we could translate to have thrown. And agnosthai, notice that that's a middle passive, we could translate to have been known. And the been is there because it's passive. That's fairly straightforward, and that's the kind of basic translation I'd look for if I ask you in the Paideia exercises how to translate one of these perfect infinitives. But in practice, we'll sometimes translate perfect infinitives just as if they're regular aorist or undefined infinitives. If we read eis ta gegraptai ta, we might translate that simply, so that it is written. So that eis ta, and now auta, it, is the subject of the infinitive, even though it's in the accusative case. And gegraptai is the perfect passive infinitive, is written. Notice there's no have in there anywhere. And that's because it would just be too awkward. In situations like this, what we find is that it's impossible to communicate in good English the nuance that the perfect aspect brings to the infinitive. And so this is a great example of something that you can't really get, you can't really understand or notice unless you're reading the Greek text. Similarly, if we read "Thelo ta prosopa auton heurakenai," we might translate that "I want, thelo, to see heurakenai, their faces, ta prosopa auton." Here again, there's nothing about the English "to see" to warn us that this is a perfect aspect. And because we're dealing with a present tense situation, or even future, "I want to see," we can't really use have in our English translation. So we just have to know, as people who know how to read Greek, that even though we translate it "I want to see," there's the extra nuance that what we want is to see their faces and then be in a situation in the state of having that knowledge. It's an action that we want to perform, but there's the added nuance that it's going to have an ongoing impact after that. That perfect aspect is something that we just have to understand and explain if we're teaching passages like this. Perfect imperatives are extremely rare. There are only 4 perfect imperative forms in the whole New Testament. One is pefimosa, from phimao, in Mark 4:39. The second is erosthe, from rognumi, in Acts 15:29. And the third and fourth are both the same form, iste, the perfect imperative of oida, which shows up in Ephesians 5:5 and James 1:19. Again, if we're translating these, it's very difficult to get the perfect aspect through in an imperative. English doesn't have a good construction to communicate that. And so we would translate it much the way we would translate an aorist imperative and have to explain the extra nuance of the perfect aspect. You can learn more about the Greek perfect infinitives and imperatives in Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek in the 3rd edition, and I've given you the section and page numbers here.